Good evening, everyone. Late Night Mega here, and tonight we're playing White-Black Eldrazi Processors. Now, this is kind of an interesting deck. Um, I did try out as a one-night stand sort of thing a Blue-Black Eldrazi Processor. It was kind of like all in on the processing. It had 4 Wasteland Stranglers, 4 Blight Herders, and 4 Ulamog's Ulamog's Nullifier. That's what it is. The counter one. And I had problems processing stuff, having enough stuff in exile to use those guys' effects with, or sometimes I'd have all the stuff that exiles my opponent's stuff, but not any of the processors, and so I really didn't like the feel of the deck. So I was a little wary of coming into this deck, but I saw some lists that I liked, and I kind of tweaked it over. I'd say I played this deck for about a month or so, and so I made some adjustments to it. This deck originally did have 3 Blight Herders in the main deck, but I just found that I really liked casting Reality Smasher a lot more. The tokens from Blight Herder, I found that they don't fly, and so if I wanted tokens, I would rather just be casting the Lingering Souls, because we've got a play set of those in here. Or I'd rather just be casting a Reality Smasher once I reach 5 mana. So I ended up replacing those with some Matter Reshapers and some more cheap sort of stuff to interact with. So that kind of leaves Wasteland Strangler as like the only actual processor of the deck, but still we're going to call it Eldrazi Processors, so there, or Processor. So main idea is to exile your opponent's stuff, and then use like Wasteland Strangler's effect to put a card from exile back into your opponent's graveyard in order to give one of their creatures -3/-3. And so this plays a lot of stuff that exiles things from their graveyard or from play. The reason I like the white-black over the blue-black version is, well, we get Path to Exile, so we're not as reliant on Relic of Progenitus to enable our processors to start doing what we need to do. And also, with only Wasteland Strangler as the only processor, you're not reliant on exiling their stuff at all to have your deck functioning decently. So we also have where to go? Well, we have a lot of 1-drops in this deck. We've got Inquisition of Kozilek, Thoughtseize, Relics, Path to Exile. So a lot of things to just kind of set up your early turns. And then we do run 4 Eldrazi Temples, so Matter Reshaper, Wasteland Strangler, and Eldrazi Displacer can all potentially be played on turn 2 when you have an Eldrazi Temple. And also we have Tide Hollow Sculler as a 2-drop. And so the Sculler will also exile a card from your opponent's hand, which you can also process that card, putting the card you exiled from the Sculler back into your opponent's graveyard, and then killing something with the Strangler. And then when they do kill the Sculler, well, they don't get their card back because it's no longer in exile. It got put into their graveyard. So lots of interesting interactions like that. I do enjoy the Scullers in the main deck. I'll get into that a little bit more later when I talk about the matchups. You might notice this one of Expedition map is because, well, we are running 25 lands. I do find that it's really important for this deck to really make its land drops. And there's also a little bit of a versatile land package, so I do like having the one-of map just to kind of tutor for whichever specialty land we might need, and we'll get into that when we get down to the lands. Collective Brutality. This is an interesting card. It can function as creature removal. It can function as the first option, revealing and making your opponent discard an instant or sorcery. Pretty good against like Ad Nauseam, Scape Shift, Burn. Matchups, 3 matchups that are kind of bad for this deck. And also losing 2 life and gaining 2 life Again, also good against burn. And we have a lot of things that cost us life in this deck. We are running 4 of the Caves of Koilos, the black-white pain land. And we also have Anguish Unmaking. This is just a nice little one of just kind of a catch-all answer to anything on the board. It costs us 3 life, but it exiles and it's an instant. So I've enjoyed it. There is a one of. We have Lingering Souls in this deck as well, and Sorens, which Lingering Souls is another thing we can discard to Collective Brutality, or discarding an extra land should we be getting a little bit flooded. But yeah, the Lingering Souls, the Sorin, it allows us to kind of attack on a little bit of a different axis because we've got tokens, we've got these Eldrazi's, we've got hand disruption, and so there's a lot of things going on. This is a very interactive non-blue control style deck. It's almost kind of like a mid-range control style deck, and I really do enjoy this. Let's get into our lands here. We have 3. You'll notice that there's a Bloodstained Mire, Polluted Delta, and down here we have a Windswept Heath. Those should be 3 Marsh Flats, but I, however, do not own Marsh Flats, so I worked with what I had. And for the most part, they're going to function just as well. I think like 80-90% of the time I was getting a Godless Shrine with them anyways. So for other lands, we've got 4 Eldrazi Temples, 4 Caves, 3 Ghost Quarters, because we do like blowing up man lands or Tron lands with those. We have a couple basics, Seagate Wreckage, which I've enjoyed this as a nice one of. Nice thing to tutor for in the late game. You know, it helps you draw extra cards. I think it is the only source of card draw in this deck. So, but I mean, I've always found that there's plenty of things to do. There's Bojuka Bog, so there's another graveyard, mass graveyard exiling effect in the deck. We have Urborg to make everything a swamp, fix our black mana permanently, and help us to stop taking pain from fetch lands and Caves of Koilos. Those can now tap for black with an Urborg out without costing us any life. And we have a Vault of the Archangel, which is really nice when we have all these Lingering Souls tokens, and also just our Eldrazi in general to regain some lost health. There are a lot of games where you can get pretty low on health, and the play is pretty tight in order to pull out a victory. But Vault of the Archangel can really help you, especially if you get a bunch of Lingering Souls tokens out. I remember a time where I just like completely stalled an affinity deck for what felt like a half dozen turns at least, just because I had 4 Lingering Souls tokens out and the Vault out. And we also have Shambling Vent, another nice land that can make 2 of our colors. Technically we have black, white, and colorless. We do have some colorless things in our casting costs for our Eldrazi, but it can also regain us life as the game goes on. And so sideboard, we'll go over the sideboard real quick. We've got 2 Engineered Explosives, Pithing Needle, a couple Surgical Extractions for combo decks, a lot of sort of standard type of stuff you'll see, plus Alliance for well, you guys know how I like sacrifice effects. Disenchants for some additional artifact and enchantment removal. Flaying Tendrils. This is meant as kind of a small sweeper against aggro decks that can get under most of our creatures and kind of extend pretty big. I do really wish it would give -3/-3, but this does also exile the creatures, so it's another nice way to enable our processors, or I should just say our stranglers, because that's the only processor we have. Curse of Death's Hold. This is really nice against decks like Infect and Affinity. Once you get this down, you know, it's pretty much game over for them. And then we've got one of Blood Baron of Vizkopa. This is pretty good against like your Abzan, somewhat your Jund matchups, it just nullifies a lot of removal is just not good against it. A single lightning bolt doesn't kill it. It's immune to path. It's immune to terminate. And black and white creatures can't block it or deal damage to it. And it has lifelink, so it also helps you regain life in those matchups. Really good against black-white tokens as well, as I've found out, because they just can't deal with that thing once it's resolved. And a couple All is Dust in here. This is kind of the big sweeper that I've chosen. There's a lot of early game interaction, early game creatures, so at least in theory you should be able to survive long enough to reach All is Dust mana. And also do keep in mind that Eldrazi Temple can tap for 2 mana for the All is Dust, so you could be casting it when you have 6 or even 5 lands in play, provided you've got a temple or 2 in there. And this can just be, well, it's another sacrifice effect, and it can also be a one-sided board wipe with all of these Eldrazi's that are devoid and have no color. So let's talk matchups. Matchups, this is good against any deck trying to abuse the graveyard. So like Dredge and Living End. I know Dredge is pretty big right now, and a lot of people are kind of afraid of the Dredge matchup. They're like, oh, well, I need to get into my sideboard for that. You want to be playing against Dredge with this deck because you have a main deck playset of Relic of Progenitus, and you have a Bojuka Bog and an Expedition map to fetch that. So those are the matchups you want, things that highly interact with the graveyard. And also like creature-based decks. This is pretty good at combating creature-based decks. Most of your mid-range creatures, you can either trade them for your opponent's stuff, or you'll get card advantage out of them, like killing something with Wasteland Strangler and then trading it with another creature. And then things like Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher will probably be bigger than anything that they're doing. So yeah, creature-based matchups. Control matchups, you've got a decent amount of hand disruption. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Jund here because Tidehollow Sculler kind of goes in line with this. It's not, the Sculler's not as good against control decks or Jund that has a lot of main deck removal, a lot of main deck ways to get rid of it. But that's kind of okay because for games 2 and 3, you'll side those out. For game 1, you can use the Sculler to kind of draw removal away from some of your other guys, the Thought-Knot Seer and the Smasher. So it does have its purposes even in those matchups. And against control, you do run a playset of Lingering Souls, pretty good against control and counter spells. Other than that, decks that's weak against your combo matchups that don't involve graveyard use, like, or really any deck that's not trying to use the graveyard, because it just makes your relics look a little silly sitting there. So decks like Ad Nauseam and Scape Shift, that's kind of where Collective Brutality kind of comes in and helps. And Tron doesn't care too much about their graveyard either, so Tron can be another struggling matchup. But against all 3 of those matchups, that's why I like to run the Scullers in the main deck. Some people run them in the sideboard, but I like them in the main deck to help out in those matchups, put pressure on the combo deck, and disrupt them at the same time. And Merfolk as well can be a toss-up matchup, but I found, once again, with the Tidehollow Scullers in the main deck, it's a nice way to disrupt the Merfolk. They have counter spells, but it's more along the lines of countering instants and sorceries or countering non-creature spells with, like the Curse Catcher and the Spell Pierce. So your creatures, you can mostly count on having them resolve. And once you kill some of their merfolks, a Curse Catcher sitting there against a Thought-Knot Seer or a Reality Smasher doesn't look too impressive for them. Eldrazi Displaces is another one I wanted to talk about. Some people run them, some people don't. I do like the shenanigans that this guy can have. I do like that he can come in on turn 2 as well and just be a nice early game 3/3. But like I've had times where I've had a Tide Hollow Scholar sitting there and a Wasteland Strangler on the board, and I swing my creatures into my opponent's Thought-Knot Seer, and he blocks with one of them. I'm like, okay, I'm going to blink my Wasteland Strangler, process the card that was exiled by a Sculler, and give your Thought-Knot Seer -3/-3, kill it in combat with whatever you decide to block against, and draw a card off of their Thought-Knot Seer dying. So a lot of interesting interactions like that. You can also just like really slow down the game. You can use it to constantly blink Thought-Knot Seer and rip apart your opponent's hand that way. You can also use it to blink Tide Hollow Sculler after you've already processed something for him, so you can grab another card from him. You can use it to just lock down one of your opponent's attackers, against something like Infect. They go to pump their guy, you blink it and take it out of combat, losing whatever pumps that they had. So yeah, just a lot of applications. So oh yeah, other good matchups. Infect is a pretty decent matchup. You've got plenty of disruption for them. You've got plenty of removal. You've got Lingering Souls, and you have things like Wasteland Strangler, these colorless Eldrazi that Apostle's Blessing doesn't really work against because they're colorless. They're not artifacts. So that's nice. You have Affinity. Affinity is also a pretty decent matchup. Once again, Wasteland Strangler can kill off your opponent's Etched Champions, because once again, this card has no color, it's devoid. And Etched Champion might have protection from all colors, but does not have protection from colorless. Yeah, so black-white tokens can be a struggling matchup, but that's why I've kind of geared the sideboard to have Blood Barons, Engineered Explosives, Disenchants, all things that are pretty good against black-white tokens, and the Flaying Tendrils, and the Curse. So yeah, a lot of intricate plays, really enjoyable deck. So that's all for this deck. Now we're getting up to pretty much the current time of where we're at, and what deck I'm currently playing. I do have one more deck that's kind of a one-night. It's kind of a one-night stand sort of deck. I'm not sure if I'm going to show that off or not on here, but I do have the deck list, so I'll either be showing that or I'll be showing the next deck that I'm currently working on, which, to give you a little teaser for that deck, is it's basically a deck that takes elements from all of these different decks that you've seen on this channel so far and combines them together, kind of a culmination of my time and experience in Modern. And that's what went into building this deck. But I'm still testing this deck. I have not even taken it to an FNM yet, so I plan on doing that. But as of the recording of this, I've also been playing Standard, which you might have already seen the Standard deck as well by the time this gets uploaded. But that would be why why I've kind of slowed down on the decks, these deck techs coming out. So until next time, this is Late Night Mega. Good night, everyone.